They say that jazz was born in New Orleans, and that's a story worth telling. But it's also true that jazz doesn't belong to any one place. Its heart beats in every city where people come together to make music and find their voice. Hi, I'm here. Over the past 3 seasons, we've traveled all over the world to bring you stories about jazz. We've explored how it got its start in New Orleans and how it grew into a global phenomenon. In Japan, for instance, jazz has been popular since the 1950s. Many Japanese musicians studied abroad with some of the greatest American jazz musicians, bringing back new ideas and innovations when they returned home. The same thing is true when we look at how jazz has evolved throughout its history. It's a community of musicians and fans who come together to celebrate the joy of making and listening to great music. Thanks for listening. This series was produced by me with help from our digital team. Our theme music was composed by Jason Sherman, and our logo was designed by Amanda Gorman. Be sure to check out our website for news about jazz, links to all the amazing musicians we've featured this season, information about how you can support our work. Till next time, remember, jazz doesn't belong to any one place. Its heart beats wherever people come together to make music and find their voice. So next time you hear a jazz tune that gets you moving, take a moment to appreciate the rich history and cultural significance of this truly global music form. As we wrap up our journey through the world of jazz, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. We've explored the roots of jazz in New Orleans, the evolution of the genre over the decades, and the vibrant communities of musicians and fans who keep jazz alive. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the history, culture, and music of jazz as much as we've enjoyed sharing it with you. If you're a musician yourself, we encourage you to keep playing, keep creating, and keep pushing the boundaries of this amazing art form. And if you're a fan of jazz, we encourage you to keep listening, keep dancing, and keep supporting the musicians who make this music possible. Early jazz was rooted in the blues and ragtime, but it quickly developed its own unique sound and feel. New Orleans was a melting pot of cultures, and the music reflected that. African rhythms and melodies blended with European harmony and instrumentation, and the result was something completely new and exciting. The first jazz musicians were innovators. They broke the rules and pushed the boundaries of what was possible in music. They created a style of music that was full of energy, emotion, and most importantly, improvisation. This spirit of innovation and improvisation is what has allowed jazz to thrive and evolve over the decades. It's no surprise that jazz has become a truly global phenomenon. With its infectious rhythms, improvisational spirit, and ability to incorporate influences from different cultures, jazz has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned jazz aficionado or a curious first-timer, there's always something new to discover in this endlessly evolving genre. Saxophonist Sadao Belafonte is a great example. He went to New York in the 1960s and performed with the likes of Dizzy, Gillespie, and Thelonious Monk before returning to Japan and becoming one of the country's most loved jazz musicians. Today, you can hear distinctly Japanese sounds in his compositions, like the use of traditional Japanese instruments like the shakuhachi. Meanwhile, pianist Hiromi Uehara studied in Boston and now tours internationally. Her playing is technically brilliant and full of energy, and her compositions blend elements of classical music, jazz, rock, and even a little bit of pop. Also, pianist and composer Keiko Fujiwara incorporates elements of traditional Japanese music into her work. She often plays a Fender Rhodes electric piano, and her compositions have a very distinctive Japanese feel. We've talked about how jazz tells us about history, culture, race, politics, and life. Like Brazil, African music and jazz have a lot in common. They both have a strong emphasis on improvisation, polyrhythms, and call and response patterns. When American jazz musicians started traveling to West Africa in the 1950s, it was love at first listen. Musicians like trumpeter Miles Davis and saxophonist John Coltrane were deeply influenced by the music they heard in Africa. Davis even recorded an album called Bitches Brew in 1970, which blended jazz with elements of rock, funk, and world music, including African rhythms. And Coltrane recorded an album called Interstellar Space with Sun Ra in 1964, which experimented with free jazz and Afro-cosmic sounds. Both albums were a little ahead of their time, but today, there is a rich tradition of jazz in West Africa, a younger generation of musicians carrying on the tradition. One of them is Salif Keita, a Malian musician who plays the guitar and sings. His music blends traditional West African folk music with elements of jazz, funk, and soul. In fact, many of his songs are actually in English. Or take a listen to this track by Les Tambers de Brazza, a group from Cameroon. Their music blends traditional Cameroonian rhythms with elements of jazz and funk. You can hear the influence of American jazz musicians like John Coltrane and Charles Mingus in their sound. And we've heard stories about some amazing musicians who are keeping jazz alive and making new music in the tradition of the greats. In this final episode, let's look at how jazz took over the world. Now, when I think about the places that have embraced jazz and made it their own, the first place that comes to mind is Brazil. Back in 1917, a group of musicians from New Orleans traveled down to Rio de Janeiro. They brought the sounds of jazz, ragtime, blues, and a little bit of Cuban music, and they mixed it with the rhythms and feel of samba. The result was a whole new style of music that people started calling samba jazz, or jazz samba. You might know some of the big hits that came out of this movement, like Black Orpheus from the movie Black Orpheus, or A Night in Tunisia by Dizzy Gillespie, which actually was inspired by an Afro-Cuban mambo band he heard while he was in Brazil. It was just a few years later, in 1940, that Gillespie would travel to the US and help launch what became known as bebop. But that's another story for another time. More recently, I had the chance to talk with Brazilian pianist and composer Helio Alves about how his love for American jazz led him to form his own unique style. He said, quote, "I learned from Oscar Peterson and Bill Evans, but they couldn't play some of the tunes I wanted to play because of the harmonic changes and the rhythmic concept. So I had to learn to play those tunes by myself." Another great example is the late saxophonist and composer Paulo Moura. He recorded more than 20 albums, blending jazz with Brazilian rhythms and sounds, and he was also instrumental in creating the annual jazz festival in Rio de Janeiro, which first started in 1973. Today, the festival is one of the most important jazz festivals in all of Latin America. There are so many other places around the world where jazz has taken root and grown in surprising ways. Then there's West Africa, which has such a rich musical heritage. Wherever jazz has traveled, it's been transformed by the unique musical traditions and sounds of each place. And remember, jazz isn't just about the music. Until next time, may your days be filled with the sweet sounds of jazz, and may your rhythm be as infectious as the laughter of Louis Armstrong.